Hello, I'm Tim Shoebridge for Cherry Audio. Welcome to their latest product presentation, and what a product it is. It sounds absolutely magnificent. You'll know by now what it's called. It's called the Trident Mk III. Let's take a listen. So the original Trident, the Korg Trident, it dates back to 1981. There was a Mark II version with some slight improvements. That was 1 year later in 1982. Now, as the name suggests, Trident, it was a 3-section synthesizer. It was a performance instrument, basically. You know, why take 3 keyboards to a gig when you only need to take 1? That was the idea behind it. Very similar to the Arp Quadra, which had 4 synth sections to it. So what were those 3 sections inside the Trident? Well, the first one was a polysynth. It was an 8-voice polysynth with 2 VCOs per voice. Next to it was a brass section. Interesting choice, brass section, but it did play some really nice leads and basses as well. And then the third section was a string section, like a string machine, and who doesn't love a string machine? Right, so time to get hands-on with the Trident Mk III. Here it is in all its glory. I'm going to say from the very beginning here that there is so much to this instrument. It is so deep. There's so much you can do with it that I'm not going to be able to cover all of it in this video. I'm just going to really just be touching the surface of it. I think a lot of that is down to the fact that there are these 3 instruments all in one, but it's then how Cherry Audio have taken those 3 instruments and just allowed you to go crazy with them. There's so much here. I'm not going to be able to cover it all, and I'm not going to even mention it all either. There's just too much to cover. So please check out other demos on the internet when they're available, as well as that, check out the user guide. It's really comprehensive and really useful. So let's get stuck in. I'm going to put my glasses on so that I can see what I'm doing. That's going to be really helpful, isn't it? Let's take a look at the front panel just in general terms, and then we'll dig into the details. So the front panel is really logically laid out. You can see that we have this synthesizer section, brass section, and string section, and then on the far right we've got a master section. Now below that we have our infamous Cherry Audio virtual keyboard that we've got here, plus the performance controls on the left hand side. This top panel, which has got the main synth sections in it, that's always present and visible on the screen. It's this second half of it, if you like, the keyboard and the performance controls. This can switch in and out depending on what we're doing. At the very bottom, you'll see that we have a very sort of like a minimized view of the effects that are going on inside the Trident Mk III. This is the same layout as Cherry Audio had with their Crewmaster Spirit, the last instrument to be released. And it's really handy to be able to see what is going on. Now, the original Trident back in 1981, it only had one effect. It was a kind of a phaser effect. It really sort of added to the sort of the strength of the sounds that you could get out of the Trident, but you could only apply it to one of the sections at any point in time. You couldn't apply it to more than one section. Now, Cherry Audio have gone crazy with the effects inside Trident Mark III. We'll cover them later on, but just sort of like to say up front that each of the sections can have their own effects chain. And then there can be a master section as well of effects, and so you can flick between them with these colored little buttons down here to see which effects are affecting which part of the synth. So it's a little bit like the Crumar Spirit in that respect, but we have 3 different sections, and the color coding, as you might be able to tell here, it's very faintly done, but just to give you a hint, so you know where you're going, we've got red for the synthesizer section, green here for the brass section, and we've got blue for the string section. Now this little sort of like set of controls here is the same across all of those 3 sections. We have a volume control for mixing those sections together when we are playing them layered or split, and then we have a little enable button, on off. I'm going to give you a little example of that now with this patch I've got going on here. As you'll see by these LEDs at the top, it's really handy to see which of the sections are active at any point in time. If I turn off the synth section down here, you can see the LED goes out. It's pretty obvious. So let me just play you this patch with, as it should be, with all 3 sections playing. They're all layered on top of each other. It sounds like this. Absolutely monster. It's wonderful, isn't it? So that's all 3 of those sections playing. There are effects going on there as well, but let's audition these sections individually so you can hear the contribution that they're making to that patch. So if I turn off the brass, I turn off the strings, so we just listen to the synth. This is actually the sort of the main sound to this particular patch. So we get that lovely long swell coming from the filter and the filter envelope, and then it sort of like just dies down and is quiet. This is the brass section. This is what the brass section sounds like. It's very delicate. It doesn't sound like brass at all, does it? The brass section is really great. You can get such a variety of sounds out of it. It's almost like a organ kind of sound. And then we have the strings. Let's just audition those. Sounds like this. String ensemble. It's timeless, isn't it? Slow attack on those strings. Now, a really fun way to use Trident Mark III, and I'm sure it was the same with the original Trident, is to use these volume controls to bring in the sections gradually, play around with the levels and see what it sounds like. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have the synth section playing. I'm going to, sorry, there's an aeroplane going over. Obviously someone very important. I'm going to have the synth section playing. I'm going to add in, let's say I'll add in the strings, and I'm going to turn up the volume control gradually so that we can hear the effect that it makes. So this is the synth section. And here comes the strings. So something I haven't mentioned, stereo. There's bags of stereo in the Trident Mark III, bags of stereo. You can hear that the synth is over on one side and the strings are over on the other. So now we have this with these 2. And now let's introduce the brass as well and see what contribution it makes to the sound. Let's play a bit higher up. Just sort of like fills it in the middle a bit. Wonderful. Right, it's time to take a little look at each of these different synth sections that we've got here. Let's start with the brass section. Now, I've mentioned before that the brass section is really flexible. You can get lots of sounds that don't sound anything like brass. However, here with this patch I've got going on here, I've got a bit of a brass sound going on. It sounds like this. So it's not capable of being monophonic, it's polyphonic. Well, actually, it's paraphonic. You'll see here on the screen we have a filter with the normal controls, cutoff control, resonance, and then an envelope intensity, which can be positive or negative. And we have an envelope generator down the bottom here, but we only have one of them, even though you could hold down loads of keys on the original Trident and up to 16 keys on the Cherry Audio Trident Mark III. Although we've got that polyphony going on there, we've only got one envelope, and that is a paraphonic synth. I'll play a patch in a second where we can hear that going on in a little bit more detail. But this is the brassy patch that I've got here. You can see I've got a slow attack on the envelope. Filter cutoff is down a little bit, so we're getting that sort of smudge as the envelope kicks in. You can do things like this, for example. That kind of thing, but it's got a real wonderful bottom end to it. So I'm going to play you now a patch which I came across, or I adapted one that was already there. I've given it my name. But this one really blew my socks off, I have to say. Now, I've got all three of the sections playing. I'm going to turn off the synth, I'm going to turn off the strings, and we're just going to hear the brass on its own. Now, I've got an arpeggio going on here, okay, so that's what we'll hear. But this is just the brass section, sounding like this. I don't know if you can hear over the wonders of YouTube, but the bottom end is just huge. It really is huge. You know, when I first heard that patch and how massive it was, and how wonderful and creamy, and I'm not going to say mogy, but it just sounds so wonderful. I did actually, at that point, in all honesty, I turned around to some of the equipment I've got in my studio, and I looked at it and thought, do I really need you anymore with this kind of thing going on? Dangerous thoughts, I know. But it is massive. Let's play around a little bit. Let's take the arpeggiator off. I'm going to show you this motion section here. We're going to cover it later on. There's a ton of controls on here. It looks a little bit scary, but don't worry, it is not scary at all. I'm going to just turn off the arpeggio. We'll go back to the keyboard. So we can now play that patch. So I'm going to turn up the sustain a little bit so it doesn't die down to nothing. Now we're in kind of legato way of playing now. So the very first time I hold down a key, the envelope triggers like this, but then any other key I press down afterwards doesn't trigger that envelope. Gives some really quite interesting effects that way. There is a little button down here called multi, which is multi-trigger. So now every time I hold down a note, we'll have that same single envelope retriggering, which is absolutely fine if you're playing chords like this. Okay, what else can we mention? There is an effect here with the brass section. It's a vibrato effect. You turn it on and off with this little button down here. Oh, let's play a bit up here. Let's just turn up that sustain so we can hear it. It's a bit fast by default. Let's turn it down. It's a subtle effect, which I really like actually. And then we've got a delay time on it, which is really quite an advanced feature, isn't it? So we can add in some nice delay to it. So if I play sort of quick chords, they're not affected, but then it kicks in. You can hear all of the stereo-ness of that patch. That was my little brass patch playing there, but adding in the other two sections. Now a little quick moment to talk about stereo before we get on to one of the other sections. You can hear there hopefully how stereo it was. Over on the right hand side in the master section, you'll see that there are two pan controls, one for the brass and one for the strings. So you can pan the brass and strings where you want them in the stereo field. There is no control for the synth section, and that's because all the way over here, when we look down into the synth section, we can see two VCOs, VCO number 1, VCO number 2. We've got ability to set their volume here, and we've also got the ability to set their individual pans. So we've got control over the stereo panning of each of the oscillators individually, which means internally here Cherry Audio have had to implement twice the number of filters and VCAs to be able to make this work and keep a stereo signal path, which is absolutely amazing. And that's a really good time to look at the synth section now. Okay, let's take a look at the synth section next. Here it is. As I pointed out before, we have two oscillators, VCO number 1 and VCO number 2. Back in the very, very, very early 1980s, lots of synths didn't have many different waveforms to choose from, and it's the same with the Trident. We have here a sawtooth and a pulse wave, a variable width, pulse width square wave going on for VCO number 1. So this is the sawtooth on its own. Pulse wave, we can either manually change the pulse width for VCO number 1. Or we can modulate it. And the cool thing is when we do modulate it, it's got its own little inbuilt LFO to do that. So this control here now becomes the modulation amount control. And this is the speed. That's very cool. Let's introduce VCO number 2 now. VCO number 2 has got the same waveforms. It's got a sawtooth and a pulse wave, but the pulse wave doesn't have the little LFO. You can just manually adjust the pulse width. But to compensate for that, we've got a triangle wave. Now we've noticed that there is this little dedicated LFO for pulse width modulation. There is a general purpose LFO over on the left hand side here. What we can modulate with this LFO is controlled with these 3 controls down here. Underneath we can modulate the oscillator pitch, the VCF, the filter cutoff, and the VCA. What else to mention about the synth section? Okay, well, the filter, obviously. Let's talk about the filter. Filter section here, cutoff control, resonance control, envelope, generator intensity, and keyboard tracking. The sort of very standard stuff that you'd expect on any filter. But it's a multi-mode filter implemented here. We've got low pass, high pass, band pass, and we've got notch as well. What else to mention? We have dedicated filter envelope. We've got a dedicated amplitude envelope as well. We've got a variety of modes here in terms of polyphony, playing polyphonically, mono mode, unison with detune, etc. It's capable, the synth section, of capable of creating all sorts of wonderful sounds, and because we've got the unison section, we can create some huge, great, massive sounds. I think what I want to do, just to sort of like give you a feel for what it can do, I've been having a little bit of a check out of James Dyson's wonderful set of patches that he has got. It's called the Momentum Pack for the Trident. And I picked out a few examples where he has got a patch just purely playing with the synth section and not the other sections. Let's try this one here. This is called pulse width modulation lead. It's actually it's really set up for aftertouch. I don't have aftertouch on my keyboard here, but it still sounds wonderful. It's massive, isn't it? When I was hearing that, I was thinking it was in unison mode, but it's not. It's just in mono mode. Massive, lovely. Let's try this here. This is fascinating. This is almost an old kind of piano sound. Isn't that wonderful? It's great. Absolutely wonderful. What else have we got? A synth patch. The flute in the clouds. Again, I thought this was a unison patch, but it's just mono again, and it's actually just VCO number 2 playing a triangle wave. Maybe one more. Boys choir. This is a wonderful, wonderful very angelic sounding patch. Sounds like this. Isn't that beautiful? Right, the third and final section, the string section. It's actually the simplest of them all. Very few controls here that we have to worry about. It sounds absolutely wonderful, and a lot of the reason for that wonderful sound is the ensemble effect. You can see it switched on here. We have 3 effects that we can apply to the strings. Let's turn them all off and then hear what it sounds like with nothing. Very basic. This is with the ensemble on its own. It makes all the difference, doesn't it? We have a vibrato effect, which is exactly the same effect that we saw with the brass. We have a speed, an intensity, and a delay as well. So this is with vibrato and ensemble together. Now the third effect is called bowing. It's supposed to sort of simulate the bowing effect with real strings in an orchestra. It actually sort of affects the beginning of the sound. I think it gives it sort of like a swell. So we have a bowing tone and a level. I'm going to whack it up to maximum so that we definitely hear it. And I'm just going to try with the tone down at 0 to start off with. In fact, actually, before we do that, I'm going to get rid of this attack. So we have a very simple envelope with the strings, a simple attack and release, and it's obviously full sustain afterwards. I'm just going to turn down the attack so it's immediate. And now turn up this tone of the bowing. It's sort of like a slow attack on a filter that's affecting the sound. That's basically what it sounds like to me. but there's no way of affecting the speed of that attack. It is what it is. I'm sure it's exactly like the original Trident. I just have to say that I generally don't use it, and the reason I don't use it is because the sort of string sounds that I love have got a long attack to them, so you won't hear that bowing effect. Only other thing to really mention is that we have these different voices. So we have 3 voices at different octave settings. We've been listening to all 3 of them together, but we have a 4-foot, 8-foot, and 16. Then finally, these 2 controls here. They're tone controls. We can basically affect the amount of lower frequencies and higher frequencies. Really nice string ensemble effect, it really is. I tend to play around with this equalizer section a lot actually, and I tend to sort of like take the low end out of the string section when I'm blending it with the synth and the brass, because at the end of the day what really works best for me trying to blend these 3 sections together is to try and find complementary sounds that are not getting, you know, don't share all the same frequency range, so therefore are not sort of like getting muddy in the middle there. And that's what we'll look at next, is the different ways that we can blend these 3 sections together, layer them as well as splits. Right, in this section we're going to look at the different ways that we can layer and split these 3 different sections that we've got here. Now with that preset that I was just playing there, I'm just layering them on top of each other. Whatever note I play, it plays all 3 sections at the same time. But what I'm going to show you is how we can be a bit more creative. In fact, we can be incredibly creative because Cherry Audio have given us complete flexibility over layering and splitting the keyboard. Now, to see how we do that, we need to change from this keyboard view we've got going here to what is called the motion view. Now, I very, very briefly showed you this before, and then I took it away because I didn't want you to think that it was too complicated. Here it is. There's an awful lot going on in here. They've crammed an awful lot of functionality into this space. So let me just break it down for you and show you how intuitive it really is. Now, the bit that we're going to be talking about is this bit here. Our big keyboard, our virtual keyboard, has now turned into a little mini keys keyboard. So if I hold down some keys, you can see it's working exactly the same as before. So we have a little mini key keyboard here. We'll talk about these colored lines in a second. Below this section, in this bottom row here, what we've got is we've got a section here where you can set up aftertouch modulations. That's both polyphonic and monophonic aftertouch. And then the rest of the row is taken up with a polyphonic sequencer here, up to 32 steps. There's 2 16-step sequences which you can sort of like run one after the other. So we've got 32 steps of sequencing going on here. It's polyphonic. And then we've got 2 identical arpeggiators. But for now, let's talk about this section here. This is where we define whether we're going to layer or split. Now these lines are color coded, so we've got red for the synthesizer, green for brass section, and blue for the string section. And it's literally just a case of dragging the ends of these lines and saying, okay, well, I want the brass to go from here to here, I want the synth to go from here to the middle, and I want the strings to go from that point upwards. It's literally as simple as doing that to define your splits and layers. So you can have overlapping regions and regions where you only hear one of the sections. It's very, very powerful and very, very creative. Cherry Audio have provided us with a few little instant click templates. So if you want to go back to just full layering, click here, and then we've got lots of other different options available to you if you want to not bother with dragging those lines but just set them up instantly yourself. What I want to do with the patch that I've got going on here is I'm going to take one of the sections out. I'm going to remove the brass section, and so we're just dealing with the synth section and the strings section. I'm actually going to drag this line all the way to the left, and the only reason I'm doing that is just so that we just don't get, it doesn't interfere with what we're looking at. It just keeps things simple. So I've got synth and strings. I'm just going to solo the synth so you can hear what that sounds like. It sounds like this. Very plain, simple sound. And then the strings sounds like this. So I'm going to turn them both back on so we'll hear them, and let's do a simple split. Let's split at this C here, C4, C5, sorry. Let's see what that sounds like. So if I play below, I get the synth, and if I play above, well, if I play around that C, I'm starting to hear them both together, and then I get the strings. Something really, really cool that Cherry Audio have got here is a crossfade switch. If we turn crossfade on and we overlap these two regions, then it will beautifully crossfade from the synth over to the strings and then back again. It's really very, very cool. So let me give you an example. I'll just play one note at a time. So we go from strings to synth. It's brilliant. Right, let's just revisit the effects very, very quickly. They really are very, very similar in how they've been incorporated into the instrument to the Crumar Spirit, because the Crumar Spirit had those two layers, if you like, those two signal paths, and there were different effects that you could assign to each of those signal paths. Here with the Trident Mk III, we have three signal paths, if you like, three completely different synth sections, and we can apply different effects to each of those sections. So we have the color coded: red for the synth, green for the brass, blue for the strings, and we have the same color coding here: red, green and blue. And then grey is a global effects chain. So let's have a look at the effects in detail. This is this little tiny button down here, effects. Now with the Crumar Spirit you had a fixed set of effects for each of those signal paths. Here what Cherry Audio have given us with the Trident is complete freedom to choose whatever effects we want out of a long list, and then to choose the order in which those effects appear in the signal chain. So we've got this wonderful graphic here where we can sort of like plug in our effects how we like into the effects chain. It's obviously running from left to right. And then we've got obviously all the controls there to be able to set up the effects how we want for each of these color-coded effects chains: the synth, brass, the strings, and global. And if you want to try moving these things around and seeing how different combinations work, you can just grab them and move them around like this. It's very, very cool how it's been implemented. A huge amount of power and a huge amount of control over the different effects for each of the sections, and a global effects chain as well. Right, it's time to look at, maybe I think I've saved the best till last. I love this section of Trident Mark III so much. It's the arpeggiators and the sequencer combined. It's this section down here. We have two identical arpeggiators and we have a polyphonic 16-step sequencer, but we can create two patterns up to 16 steps, and then we can play one after the other. So it's actually technically 32 steps that we've got to play with here. I'm not going to go into all of the nitty-gritty of the sequencer, but let me just cover a few basics here. And in fact, the sequencer and the two arpeggiators, they have a very similar section at the front of them here, and this is where you choose what of the sections in Trident you want to control. So we can have the sequencer controlling nothing, or it can control the synth, or it can control the brass or the strings. Same with the arpeggiators: synth, brass, strings, synth, brass, strings. So you can actually have, say, the sequencer and one of the arpeggiators actually controlling the same section. There's no hard and fast rules here as to what you want to do. So you could have the sequencer stepping through slowly and maybe the arpeggiator going quicker. You can come up with so many different creative ideas using these three note sequencing options plus the three sections in Trident. So this particular patch that I've been playing here, all I've got going on at the moment is, because the sequencer is switched off, all I've got going on here is the two arpeggiators are playing. I'm going to just turn off the strings. In fact, I'll isolate the synths to start off with. It sounds like this. It's being controlled by this arpeggiator over here, and you can see it's running really quite slowly. The arpeggiators have borrowed an awful lot of the power from previous Cherry Audio products. We've got this leap mode, which is really cool. It's selecting the note that's required, then the octave above, then the one below, then the notes required. It really adds a lot of sort of like cool variation to what would be otherwise a very simple arpeggiator. Then we've got normal ARP mode, which is up, down, down, up, down, the normal classic stuff. We've got the leap mode that I've just described. We've got play the notes in the order that they were held down, and then we've got a random play order. I've mentioned the ARP modes already. Then we've got the octave range from 1 to 4 octaves. We can latch the arpeggiators, so you can just place some notes and then take your hands off the keys, and maybe one of the arpeggiators is latched, the other one isn't. Lots of creative possibilities with the arpeggiators. The sequencer itself, you can run it just the once all the way through. You can get it to loop, you can get it to ping pong, go forwards, backwards. You can get it to choose random steps. You can control it just by basically the button here, just telling it to start. You can control it from your sequencer, your DAW, so that when your DAW or your other sequencer starts, it will start exactly at the same time. It'll stop when the other sequencer stops. You can get perfect synchronization that way. I'll give you a little demo of that in a second. And then you've got step advance, which means every time it receives a note, it moves to the next step and then waits for the next note. Lots and lots of creative possibilities. Let's just see what we can do with the patch that I've got going on here. So we've just heard the synth on its own playing really quite slowly, like this. If we turn that off and we turn on the brass, this is the brass. The brass has been controlled by this sequencer, which is going much quicker. So if I put the two together, we get this. And then I've got the strings, which I just add in for a little bit of a background ambience. So maybe I like what's being played at the moment. I found some, little chords, they're just 2-note chords, which I quite like. So maybe I want to sort of program those into the sequencer, and then that'll leave me free to come up with some other idea that I can try and play over the top. Let's have a go at that. So I'm going to go to the sequencer, and I'm just going to set it to 4 steps. So we select the number of steps by clicking on this button. I'm going to say just 4 steps for this sequence. That's all I want. And let's go back to the notes, and I'm going to record. It's polyphonic, so it'll capture however many notes you want to record into it. I'm going to just play 2 at a time. So here's the first 2. And when I let go, you can see it advances to the next step. Third step. And 4th. There we go. So I've got those programmed in there now. I've got the speed of the sequencer really as slow as possible, 8 beats. Everything is synchronized to the clock of my DAW. So the arpeggiators are synchronized with the sequencer, and everything's synchronized with the DAW as well. Now there's a really cool thing that you can do with these arpeggiators. It's the source of where they get their note data from. Now normally it would be from the keyboard. Whatever keys you hold down, whatever notes you hold down on the keyboard, the arpeggiator will arpeggiate them. But with these little switches here, we can say don't use the keys, use the sequencer instead. So I can actually drive these sequencers off of my saved sequence that I've got here. did I say sequencers? I can drive these arpeggiators off of the sequencer. So let me do that for both of the arpeggiators. Now, if I just start this sequencer, everything plays, and I've got no hands on the keyboard. The only thing that's not playing are the strings, because they're not being controlled by the sequencer or either of the arpeggiators. So I can play over the top. I could play just the strings, and I could do that with a smart little trick. I could just actually get these down here. Now when I move them, everything cuts out, but I'm just going to move them down to here. By moving them down to there, now when I play the keyboard, I'm never going to play those notes, and all I'll be playing are the strings, like this.